Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we probe the gender landscape within contemporary culture.
And we consider the implications of prioritizing personal identity over other aspects of the self.
This is the thinking person's take on gender.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens. We're here today, Stella, to talk about the bigger picture conference in Denver in November, the 4th and 5th of November.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's very it's a big deal for Genspect. So we had a conference in Killarney in Little Ireland in April, and it was lovely. It was a very heartening experience. Experts from all sorts of different realms came together to talk about gender. So, there was people like Helen Joyce talking about, the cultural aspect. There was Maya Forstater talking about the legal. But then we had people like Michael Biggs talking about the stats, and Ken Zucker. And, me and you did a great podcast. And so we're doing the very same thing, but bringing it to America. And the idea is WPATH have long had this idea of no debate. I shouldn't say WPATH. WPATH's supporters have been very much, and arguably the activists more than anything, have had this idea that there is no debate to be had about people that we believe are in extreme mental distress and would benefit from debate. Pushing on from that, there's also a huge cultural war that seems to have gone on where people aren't able to kind of just discuss pretty important issues, such as whether schools should socially transition children and things like that. And so we've decided that wherever WPATH are going to have their conference, we're going to have the conference as a way to make sure that people see that there's two sides to this view on gender distress. And the medicalized approach is the WPATH approach. And so it would be almost like akin to psychiatrists are having a conference up the road, and they're talking about antidepressants and they're talking about anti-anxiety medication. And they might even be talking about extreme things like ECT. While down the road, psychotherapists are talking, and the sociologists are talking about the non-medicalized approach. Mm-hmm. And it's like, we're not stopping. Off you go. If you want the medicalized approach, off you go to WPATH. If you want, however, another view, if you want a more psychological, cultural, socio kind of aspect of this, well, then you will be interested in our conference. We would love people who went to WPATH or USPATH in Denver also came to our conference. And so we're having it, and it's called The Bigger Picture, and we're very excited. We've got the most amazing lineup. I think there's a huge kind of unbusted dam as such of people who want to talk about it.
My cat just walked in. Keep going. An unbusted dam.
Well, the cat agrees with me, and you're right, cat. So there is this kind of dam of people who want to speak about it. So we have people like Michael Schellenberger, like he's a huge voice, and I've been listening to podcasts with him, and what a brain. This guy is really has like a lot to offer. And his title is How the Gender Battles Fit into the Larger War for the Preservation of Free Expression. And that's a very good kind of opener as such for Genspect, insofar as there's a larger issue. There's a huge issue around free speech, and arguably just to talk about the psychology. I remember me and you, Sasha, we once went to some psychological conference. It was online. I think it was probably during COVID, and me and you were kind of appalled because they didn't get out of the psychology. So they were talking about attachment, which is very important. They were talking about all sorts of things which are very important, but they were missing. There's a huge sociocultural aspect to this. And what we're trying to do is present them all. And one thing we will be doing at the conference, which is putting it up to me because it has to be done by then, but we've just organised for some of the great minds that are out there. And we really do. We're blessed with some brilliant people in the gender world. And we're creating the gender care framework. And so, do you remember when Geta created the clinical guidelines? And they were phenomenal. I think they are just, if any psychotherapist is working with gender, you need your Geta's clinical guidelines. However, what we're producing with the gender care framework is a framework for society. And so the first section is effectively the theories of gender and also why sex is a material reality. You know what I mean? So the contextual background to sex and gender. Then the second section is just the psychological background to sex and gender. Then the third section is schools and families and education. How can they navigate the fact that some people have transitioned? Some people are transitioning their 4-year-old, some people are transitioning and they're taking puberty blockers, and schools have to be able. So we're trying to offer a kind of a solution-focused way of navigating. There's a conflict of needs. Some girls will want same-sex spaces, some will want mixed. And so what should the schools and how should the schools navigate? Then the fourth section of the gender care framework is about society inclusivity, which is really interesting. Of course, the linguist Alistair Gunn came up with the concept of inclusivity. So society inclusivity, it's going to be a phenomenal section where it's talking about how does society navigate the fact that some people have transitioned, some people have detransitioned, some people are on puberty blockers, and we need to be able to handle that with any conflicts of needs that other people have, such as vulnerable women in same-sex spaces and stuff. How do we do it? And when you look at the concept of the word inclusivity, it's very, very interesting. It's not inclusivity, which people think.
I was going to ask you. I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
I could feel you.
Inclusivity.
Inclusivity. It's a linguistic term that the genius Alistair unearthed, and I think it's phenomenal. And by the way, Alistair conceptualized the gender care framework, and he writes the introduction and the conclusion. And so inclusivity is the entire basis on which we live in society. If you don't have a train ticket, you're excluded. You're either included or you're excluded in everything. If you're in the under 10 race, only the under 10s can go into the under 10 race. Only the grade 6 children can go into grade 6. That is how society operates on everything. All tickets, all events are inclusive. They're either inclusive or exclusive, depending on whether you have a ticket or not. So we're bringing back the concept of inclusivity, or bringing in the concept of inclusivity, and acknowledging inclusivity is denying the fact that we're constantly excluding different groups at events. Like I say, tickets. The entire fiscal economy is based on people buying into access to a service. So that section is going to be phenomenal. And then we're going to finish off with kind of law and legal policies and things like that. So, for example, the brilliant human rights lawyers that we have working on that are effectively, it's in defense of the law. And the idea of that is defending, like, the society came to where we are now because of thousands of years of thought about how to create a civilized society. So we now have to defend our laws and why they exist. And that's what will be in the section 5 of the gender care framework. So it's a massively ambitious document. But in 1979, WPATH created the standards of care. And that's a medicalized view of gender. So they kept on creating more and more and more versions. And we are creating our first gender care framework. And with the presumption that when we go to Lisbon next year, when WPATH go to Lisbon next year, we'll create version 2. It'll be expanding and it'll be getting updated. The idea behind it is to create a framework that defends the concept of a non-medicalized, gender diverse person in society, as opposed to just thinking medicalization is the only way. It's a non-medicalized approach to gender diversity. So we'll be launching that in person, the actual
huge.
physical. Yeah, it's a huge concept. It's a really big concept, and it's obviously very ambitious, but it's time for the solutions to come in. We've been criticizing for many years. The gender critical movement was very well named. It's very, very critical, and it's very, very clever. But there's an expression in therapy where you can build evidence forever. We know the evidence. We know the literature is bad. We know that the research is very paltry. And so now we have to come up with solutions, and that's what the gender care framework is trying to do. It's bringing in, well, how about schools do this? How about this is how we could handle toilets. This is how we could handle various different aspects. So we'll be launching that at the famous Bigger Picture in Denver. And we'll be launching it among the greatest minds, I believe. People like Jamie Reid will be speaking. And she'll be talking about changing minds, how gender clinics are harming children, and what the left must do to wake up and realise this. Because it's very key that they, I just want to make sure the title is right here. What the gender clinic must do to wake up and stop the harm. Because she's right. You know, Jamie Reid is very much from the left, and she wants to discuss how the left are denying it. And there's a lot of people talking about the political climate. Lior Sapiri is just a phenomenal brain, and he'll be talking about institutional capture and how gender ideology has been embedded within America. So these are really kind of societal kind of issues that will be spoken about. Bernadette Broyles, always a pleasure to listen to her. And she's going to talk about insights from a legal warrior and whistleblower, how schools, courts and clinics are hurting kids and depriving parents of their rights. So some people will find this very political and will be unnerved by it. So we're doing different sections. Mm-hmm. One section will be very sociocultural, and then another section where I think you'll be much more, this is my world, will be the psychological section, which is people like Stephen Levine will be talking about key elements of comprehensive psychiatric evaluation and psychotherapy. So there will be the and I'd be delighted if you joined us on it, a kind of a panel talking about the psychological roots to gender dysphoria, where people like myself and yourself and Lisa Marciano and Stephen Levine, Joe Berger are discussing, well, what do you think are the psychological roots? Let's forget about the socioculture. Let's just talk about the psychology, because it would be just as remiss to miss the psychology as it would be to miss the
culture.
Yeah, it's trying to bring them all in.
So for listeners who may be interested, this is a conference open to anyone who wants to join. You don't have to be like a political scholar, a legal scholar, a therapist. You can be a parent, an interested person, somebody who's kind of curious about what's happening at their friend's school. Like, it could be anybody joining. And to just kind of flush out some of these incredible people, Jamie Reid specifically is somebody we had on the show.
Oh, yeah.
She worked in a clinic in St. Louis for many years and became a whistleblower because she saw egregious practices happening there to very vulnerable young kids. And I think that the reason Jamie Reid is so important is that she serves as a precedent for other inevitable whistleblowers who went into gender affirming care because they thought they were doing the right thing, thought they were helping trans kids, and came to recognize that something is really wrong with the model. And I think, as somebody like Jamie Reid demonstrates, taking for granted what is a trans kid, what does this mean actually? And I think that's really one of the key issues, which is why Genspect is so important, because at WPATH, you're right, it's a medicalized model, but they take for granted this concept of what it means to, quote, be trans. And Genspect is taking a much more curious lens about what gender dysphoria means, what does it mean to be trans or not trans. So Jamie Reid is a whistleblower. Bernadette Broyles is her attorney, who runs child parent rights law firm.
Yeah.
And she's really focused on the way all kinds of medical and school-related educational issues impede on parental rights to make decisions about their children's well-being. So she's a very powerful speaker. She's going to be on our show as well.
Yeah.
But she was on with Jamie Reid when we spoke to them. And Lior Sapir is a legal scholar at the Manhattan Institute. I hope I characterized that correctly. But he's done an unbelievable deep dive into the policy, the science, the research, the journalism, the coverage, how this impacts schools, what's the relationship with Title IX. I mean, he's covered this in an incredibly in-depth analytical way. So he's wonderful to see on the agenda.
His title, to remind people, is Institutional Capture, and talking about how the gender ideology has been embedded. And he's a genius about policies and how the policies. I loved his podcast with us. I think he really has so much to bring. We're going to have a lovely panel discussion, which will be moderated by Benjamin Boyce. And Jesse Singal will be on it, and Michael Schellenberger, Ben Appel, Ben Appel. And he's got a book coming out around gender and, being gay and, how trans has impacted it. And Lior Sapir will be on that panel hopefully too. And it's called The Left-Wing Media's Love Affair with Trans, which is fascinating. It's fascinating. That, like, it's perfectly fine that we lost our way with the kind of extraordinary strangeness of gender dysphoria. People didn't understand it. People weren't given great treatment. What isn't understandable is how the left just closed down, deleted parents' comments under articles, resisted printing any articles that kind of said there's more to this narrative. The extraordinary response from the left-wing media is something that many of us who are really deep in this world know about, but anybody coming to the conference who didn't know that, they'll find it fascinating when you hear the examples of the depth of the resistance to the left-wing media to any sort of criticism of trans, because left-wing and trans, it's not a natural partnership, but it's been huge. I think one talk I'm really looking forward to is Denise. You know Denise from Fourth Wave Now? If you're a parent and you haven't checked out Fourth Wave Now, check it out. Like, it's a phenomenal resource. It's a phenomenal depth.
It was the first big blog here in the US. Transgender Trend and Fourth Wave came out about around the same time. And they were the only place publishing information about sudden onset gender dysphoria and how much struggle the parents were experiencing just trying to get competent, sane help for their kids. People like Michael Bailey, Ken Zucker, Blanchard, Michael Biggs, all of these people were writing for Fourth Wave Now way back in the day. I mean, it's a pioneering website.
Phenomenal. And hopefully maybe Stephanie Davis-O'Reilly from Transgender Trend will make it over.
Oh, that would
and
be
if
great.
She does, then herself and Denise will meet for the first time ever. And they will, I know! Wouldn't that be beautiful? Now, we don't know if she will, but it would be just beautiful if she does. So Denise from Fourth Wave Now is going to be talking about challenges in parenting and politics in the gender-affirming American zeitgeist. And it's a very good title because I think politics have intruded into parenting. And that's been a surprise for an awful lot of parents, that they've been disempowered by many people. And it wasn't expected. Nobody kind of saw that coming. So that's a big kind of one to watch out for. Myself and Joe will be giving different talks. Joe Burgo, he'll be maybe talking about... He's still just deciding on his titles. He's got some great titles. He was talking about one called Boys Who Don't Masturbate. I'd love that. But also he might talk about Beyond Trans. You know, he's the clinical lead for Beyond Trans, and it's a huge what would you call it? It's a huge service. Genspect run that we have. You know, something like 90 therapists on our books, and they offer counselling. And we fund the counselling for the people who've either detransitioned or have been harmed by medical transition. It's a very big deal. If you are a therapist and you're listening, please consider signing up to Beyond Trans, because it's a really worthwhile and worthy part. And you will be reimbursed. We are, paying for the therapist to give the therapy to the detransitioners. The evening...
Can I say something about this? This is a side tangent, but a lot of times in the media, we hear things like, therapists are literally not allowed to do gender exploratory therapy, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just, I mean, I know this is a bit different because you're talking about detransitioners specifically, but it's important for people to know there are therapists out there that take a nuanced approach to gender, and you just have to look in the right places to find them. And so it's so wonderful that Beyond Trans is providing this service for people who need that help. And you have a lot of therapists that you work with who do take this nuanced approach. So I just wanted to kind of plug that.
And if you do go onto the Beyond Trans, it's a directory. It's just a directory. It's not an association, just a directory of therapists. But everybody who has joined that directory has signed the declaration that is, the non-medicalized approach is their approach. So that it's kind of anti-WPATH. And WPATH is the medicalized approach, and this is the non-medicalized approach, and that's what they subscribe to. So it's a fundamental approach towards gender distress. We hope you're enjoying this episode of our podcast. We work very hard to maintain high-quality content for the show.
To take an even deeper dive and support the show, join our listener community for access to exclusive content, practical tools, and resources supporting gender and identity exploration. We're so grateful to our sponsor, Genspect, an international organization which offers an alternative to WPATH, providing a range of education, resources, and supports to anyone impacted by gender distress, Genspect unites many different organizations globally and gives voice to thousands of previously untold stories. For more info, visit genspect.org. And thank you to our sponsor, GETA. GETA is an association of therapists who believe that individuals experiencing gender-related concerns ought to be treated using a whole person approach.
We connect like-minded clinicians, provide educational resources and training, and help people with gender dysphoria find the right help.
Visit GETA at genderexploratory.com. And now back to the conversation.
The Sunday Sunday the 5th of November, it feels like, ooh, I feel scary talking about it. But Heather Haying will be beginning the day, and I just think I love her. I'm so thrilled she's coming. She's talking about sex differences and an evolutionary story. And I love the idea that people from different walks of life will be talking. It won't be just the psychs talking to each other and telling each other they're great.
Right.
And it won't be just the legals talking to each other and telling each other they're great. Instead, the sociologists will be made listen to the psychologists, which is good for everybody. Because I think we go into our bubbles. After Heather Haying, Colin Wright will be talking about the sex binary, what it is and why it matters. So we're getting into
by the way, these are two biologists. Heather Haying and Colin Wright are both biologists. Heather Haying's an evolutionary biologist, and I believe Colin Wright actually studied insects but he studied mating when he was, he's now a journalist and he's kind of fully devoted to gender. But it's really great to have the biological perspective here. So keep going.
And then Sammy Stagg, who was recommended to me by Colin Wright, he's going to talk about brain sex and how nobody's born in the wrong body. That thing that you and I feel that it's always in the background of lots of people's thought, that there's some sort of kind of thing in the brain that makes them trans. He's just going to explain brains and sex and female and male and just talk about it. He's brilliant on it. It's the one, of all the talks, it's the one I know the least about, and I really will be sitting there listening to them. Because I want to hear this. Do you know what I mean? It'll be like, everybody, I'm listening to this one. And then the lovely Carrie Mendoza from Fair for All, Fair Medicine, she will be talking about, she has an amazing talk about the opioid epidemic. But she wants to kind of expand on that. And I wanted her just to talk about that because it's an amazing talk. She talks about, she's a doctor. She works in the kind of front line in hospitals. And she kind of suffered through the opioid epidemic, where she was told it's the kindest thing to do is to give them opioids because they're in pain, and it would be cruel not to give it to them. And so she lived through it in very kind of
as a physician.
Yeah, she really did. And she sees, as she calls it, lessons from the opioid epidemic. She sees parallels to it'll be cruel to deny them this, but also, she is very interested in the concept of the electronic identity records and how there's huge mistakes and huge issues growing around, the trans man who looks so male and they come into the ambulance and nobody knows they're female and they might be pregnant, they might be having a miscarriage, there might be lots of things. And so she's saying how electronic identity really matters. So she's called her idea her talk is how bad ideas scale and unwind in US healthcare, lessons from the opioid epidemic.
That's great. That's going to be a very interesting one.
Yeah. And she's brilliant. She's just, she wears her intelligence very lightly, and it's going to be lovely. So then we'll have the panel discussions in Killarney were huge. They were brilliant. They were really, really good.
So they were a hit.
Yeah, they were lovely. So we're going to have a panel discussion on the Sunday morning, moderated by Jessie Ministo, who we had on our and that'll be
good.
That'll be Heather Haying, Carrie Mendoza, myself, Nina Paley, the artist.
Yes, of course.
And Carol
and
Hooven.
Hetero Dorks.
Yes,
Nina
and
Paley, co-host.
And Corinna will be
Carol Hooven.
Yeah, Carol Hooven. Yeah, so she's going to be on this. And I love this title. I forget how we came up with it. I think it was me and Nina Paley and Alistair came up with it. Not Your Mom. Women Resisting Gender Ideology.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of nice
one. That's a good one.
I forgot to say that me and you, Sasha, we will be on the Saturday night. We're going to have a Gender a Wider Lens. It's going to be in front of a live audience, and it will be with Chloe Cole. So
Special
yeah,
guest.
very
Amazing.
special guest.
You know, it's interesting because we tried to get Chloe on the podcast and there was some back and forth and correspondence and it never really materialized, but I couldn't imagine it being better than being live in person with her to talk during the conference. So that's going to be amazing.
I've heard Chloe talk so many times, and she does so much advocacy and, political work, and, she's just so generous with her time and stuff. But I've always wanted to know the more reflective, psychological, slower, don't tell us your story, let's just slowly think about what it was like to be little Chloe. So I think that could be really, it could be really, really instructive for so many people to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
Really
for sure.
and truly. There's so many other talks. I'll tell a few more. Jennifer Lal's one is very interesting. She thought of the title, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting, because I had some other idea. And she said, I think this would be a better one. And she said, transgender assisted reproduction, where is this going? And she, again, was ahead of the curve, because she could see that there was a number of trans men having babies. And the issues around that, the complications around that, trans men taking testosterone while they're pregnant, and all the elements of the assisted reproduction. I didn't see that coming. And then after she said the title, it's been in the news quite a bit. And I think these are the type of things that the gender care framework is going to have to kind of deal with. There's going to be trans men having babies. There's going to be trans men who are pregnant in schools. You know what I mean? And they're going to present as male, and their students will be 5 or 6 or 7. And society is going to have to navigate this. We're going to have to think about how does it impact? Who does it impact? Whose needs comes first? That's not what Jennifer is going to be talking about. Jennifer Lal is a brilliant... Could you describe her? She's been on our show,
She's a filmmaker, and she runs the Bioethics Culture Network, I believe it's called, or something about bioethics. And she is focused on issues around surrogacy. Yeah. And it's pretty remarkable.
And assisted reproduction.
And assisted reproduction. So IVF and surrogacy. And it's kind of incredible. I didn't know much about these issues, but specifically around surrogacy, the kind of human rights and ethical issues involved with something like that. And, I keep seeing on Twitter in regards to trans stuff, male to female trans women talking about wanting to get abortions and having womb transplants. And these are really serious medical ethics questions that are down the pipeline as technology just increases in its pace. So I think Jennifer Lal's talk is probably going to be prescient and very interesting.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I saw that. There's all sorts around reproduction and trans that we're going to have to grapple with. And that's, like I say, the gender care framework is trying to say, right, now we're here. Now we're going to have to grapple with these. And here are some ideas about how we could. January, little John will be here, will be giving a talk, and she'll be talking about how the school transitioned my daughter and what it took for her to desist. January is a fascinating story about, the school did transition her child, and the kid ended up desisting, and January went public with it, which is brave of her, and I'd say has certainly changed her life in many ways. But there's a lot to learn. I'd love if teachers came to the conference. I'd love if they learned, hang on a second. Where are you with January's story? Shannon Trace, do you remember her from our podcast? She's given a talk, and it's called A Marriage Lost to Gender Identity. Anybody who might like our podcast and haven't listened to the one on Shannon Trace, I thought it was a great one. I thought that was a great episode. She talks about how she fell in love with a guy, and he was very progressive. He was he wore his femininity very lightly. He was a bit of a rock star when she first met him. Yeah. And then over time, deep years into the marriage, he became interested in trans issues and then ultimately identified as a trans woman. And there was a personality change that she went through, and they ended up breaking up. It was an extraordinary story, and she tells it with compassion and understanding, and a lot of she is a very kind of, she's got a great mind because she's very accepting, really, but she realized this wasn't healthy,
Yeah, she wrote a book about her story, which if you want to listen to our episode, there's information about that. But her story is quite amazing. And we often in the YouTube comments hear from women who call themselves trans widows, which means they had a husband who transitioned to a woman, quote unquote. And this is a very painful aspect of the impact of a transition on the loved ones, on the wife who is left trying to figure out what to do, the children. So the trans widow experience is very difficult because it's a second person account. I know Benjamin Boyce talks about that a lot, that he tries to do first person accounts on his channel, which I think about that a lot just from a journalistic ethics. But I do think it's so important to hear from women who have been on the kind of receiving end of somebody else's transition. So her story is very interesting. And then there's a Q&A with her, I think.
Yeah, we've sprinkled Q&As here, there and everywhere. And sometimes with a couple of people, because we tried to get all these amazing people approached us asking could they talk. And like, not all of them, but a huge amount did. And we wanted to be we wanted them. They're amazing people. Mm-hmm. And so we packed in a lot of talks. As anybody listening to this. We really did. We've got Wesley Yang, another God. There's a lot of overlap now. I'm a bit embarrassed, but Wesley is a great brain. He reminds me of Lior Sapir, but in a different way. And he talks about how a vast institutional failure visited on the bodies of the young, gender ideology in America. So he is tracking the kind of the gender ideology and how it is how it is penetrated the culture. And we're trying to get all the signs. We're trying to get everything. We're trying to get the family, the trans widow, the cultural, the evolutionary biologists, the sports. Coach Linda Blade is going to speak about when women's sports meet gender ideology. Corinna Cohn, who's a trans woman and transitioned many years ago. She's also from Heterodorks with Nina Paley. She's going to talk about political organising. And then Alex Byrne has written a book. It's a brilliant book, and we really should consider having him on. He's a philosopher, and he's a great mind, and he's written a book called Trouble with Gender. It's just out, and it's a serious book, and I think his talk is going to be a really good philosophical kind of overview of what's going on. Alex Byrne, by the way, is married to Carol Hooven, so they're a twosome.
By the way, Carol Hooven wrote the book Testosterone. She's a Harvard professor and biologist, and she wrote a book about testosterone. We interviewed her, and she has some fascinating insights. She's also been on the Transparency podcast with the two Aarons, who I'm so excited to meet at the conference. Like, I want to get through this itinerary. We only have a few minutes left, but I also just want to say how amazing it's going to be to meet so many people who have played a huge role in my intellectual life in the last few years. Like, people don't even know how important they are to me, and then to get to meet them in person, it's very special. Like, these are people in my ears all the time. I'm listening to you constantly. I'm thinking about the things you say. I'm reflecting on your ideas. You're helping me develop my ideas. And then to get to meet you, it's just going to be so cool. That
when we were in Killarney, that was one of the most powerful aspects, was meeting people. And when you meet people in physical, it's different. It's phenomenally different. Everything about it was different. That there's something, it gives you great heart. And if anybody's demoralized, I really do. If you're living in America, consider coming to Denver. If you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling isolated, make it your business if you can at all. So many people came because they were just interested observers, and they came out with friends. And there's a lovely love relationship that came out, by the way, of a detransitioner who met in Killarney and another. I think that's beautiful.
I know, and that is amazing.
Yeah. So
whether you're looking for love or intellectual stimulation, no, just kidding.
It'll be in Denver. Come to Denver. So just to finish off, the last few talks are really powerful.
Amazing.
Aaron Friday is going to talk about the RGD kid and the parent's story of being a parent of an RGD kid. So it's straight going for the main agenda as such. Then Prisha Mosley, who is a detransitioner, she's got a phenomenal talk lined up, which is called Validation versus Affirmation. She needed validation. She needed to be heard. Do you remember we spoke about, various ways of it's a communication. They want to be listened to. They want to be taken seriously. And so dismissing a kid is at your peril. So she's talking about how, the sliding doors of detransition, that maybe if she'd been validated rather than dismissed, she didn't need affirmation, she needed validation. So that's going to be very interesting. And then we're going to finish it with the one and only Wilfred Riley and the detransition time bomb. And he's a, quantitative man, so he's going to talk about the numbers, and the numbers are extraordinary. And
interesting. I was wondering, because I know of him, but I didn't know what he was doing with gender. But he's going to look at the statistically what is coming numbers. With all these kids transitioning.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
it feels like that's an important thing to finish on. We will also, please God, we're certainly hoping to have a film premiere on the Sunday evening. So if people are thinking of coming, try and stay over for the Sunday night, because it could easily be the fun night. It could easily be the kickback. Watch the film.
I'm in the Irish film, person. So yes, please watch it. I know. Were you interviewed for that? I imagine you were.
I think I was. It was so frantic. I'd imagine I came in and just said things quickly and ran. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure I was, but it was. I think it'll be a very interesting film. Yeah, and that will be premiered, or certainly it'll be shown, as far as I know, on the Sunday evening, and it'll be the kickback evening, because it'll.
I can't wait for that.
It's exciting.
Nice. We'll have a beer and watch a film together with all my friends from Genderland. So that would be wonderful.
So if anybody's interested, and I hope people are, after that whistle-stop tour of the very many talks that we're going to be given, please go onto the Genspect site and you'll easily find access to the tickets. And I think it's going to be a really good event. I think it's going to be a heartwarming, intellectually stimulating, a kind of inspiring event, because I know Killarney was an inspiring event, so we're hoping for another.
And I mean, I want to also just say, having been in Killarney, there was a lot of amazing crossover between the WPATH, EPATH conference and the Killarney conference. People from that conference came to listen to talks at your conference and vice versa. And a lot of these speakers that we just described, they will have very different perspectives on things. Yeah. Sometimes the sociocultural commentators have a very different perspective than the detransitioners, than the moms of ROGD kids, than transition people who feel dissatisfied with the medical.
Sports people.
There's sports people. Linda Blade. I don't know if we talked about that. She's going to come talk about gender and sports. So there's so many perspectives here, and I'm thrilled. I can't wait.
I can't wait.
It's going to be good times.
So see y'all in Denver.
All right. Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, A Wider Lens. Listener support means a lot to us. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes and leave a review.
For more information, visit widerlenspod.com. There you'll learn about joining our listener community, how to contribute to our show, and where to find us on social media.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.